So, welcome everyone who is joining us on YouTube, either live or recorded. We're here for our unnamed Wednesday study session. We have people representing at least 3 states right now. As always, it's great to have you. And what we're going to talk about today is a strange but interesting topic that was chosen. I erroneously mentioned 2 or 3 people yesterday. We were doing Jewish comic books and Jews in comic strips, but that'll be in a week or 2, and 2 weeks, or 3 weeks actually. What we're doing today is the Zodiac, which is a very interesting discussion because in most people's minds, if you said, well, we're going to talk about Jews and the Zodiac, and then the entire talk is going to be, well, Jews don't believe in the Zodiac, the end. But that is actually not the truth. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the Zodiac through history from Jewish perspectives and really see what is and has been the belief system of Jews when it comes to the Zodiac. And it's really quite an interesting thing because some of us have Zodiac tendencies, even though we don't realize it. What do I mean? Well, let me explain. Well, first of all, welcome again. We introduced everybody who was here, but again, we're so thrilled to have people who are from our area, from other places. But how many of you have ever heard the phrase, and it's an old one, and I don't know if any of you have ever heard of it, and it has a lot to do with the Zodiac, funny enough. What's it called? Anybody? It's something tov, and you say it at good when something happy happens. Mazel tov. Have any of you heard the phrase mazel tov? I just couldn't think of it, but I found it eventually. Have any of you heard of the phrase mazel tov?
Sure.
That is basically part of the Zodiac right there. And most people don't realize, if you think about it, what does it mean? It means good luck or congratulations. But what are constellations in Hebrew, or according to ancient Judaism? They are, I'm sorry, we're going to let a couple more people on before we continue. Welcome, everybody's joining. We're just telling everyone that we do a little bit of the Zodiac in our homes right now as we live and breathe. The word mazalot means constellations, used twice in the Bible, and that is also used often as the word for the Zodiac or astrology. So whenever we say mazel tov, we are showing at least a little belief in astrology according to Judaism. And I thought, I think that's the most interesting thing because we use it all the time. How many of us say mazel tov every day? If it's not in person, I probably write it 5 times a day on Facebook. So it's pretty interesting that, again, mazalot are the constellations, and we're going to talk a little bit about them. Now, I think many of us understand the belief that Jews are not really that partial to the Zodiac today. How many of us know people who are really into the Jewish Zodiac as opposed to just and the non-Jewish ones? I know nobody except for one person, and he writes books about it. Genevieve. So you're in the Zodiac through Judaism. So Genevieve is a second. Excellent. If you want a really good book, Jeff Dennis is kind of the guru out of Texas, Rabbi Jeff Dennis. So the truth is, Jews and the Zodiac have been connected for generations, thousands of years. The reason we don't believe this or have trouble believing it is because we live in the 20th and 21st century. And in the 19th century, it is believed that as science became more and more part of the world, Jews intentionally decided we're going to be educated, we're going to go to science. And as time went on, very quickly though, we put the Zodiac behind us and really took on the trappings of the modern world. which was science. And so the absence of the zodiac in our lives is basically because we were born 150 years late for the zodiac. If we'd been born 150 years ago or 200 years ago or 300 years ago, it probably would be very much a part of our lives. However, we got rid of it. We consciously said, let's get rid of all the books. Let's get rid of everything and kind of hide the fact we ever did this. And it worked. It is what do they call it in government when you do this? Whitewash, what do you call it? When you cover up everything?
Cover up.
It's a cover up. Isn't there something other word? I guess cover up is a better way of saying it. It was a cover up.
Redacted.
Redacted. We got rid of all the stuff doing with Zodiac, and we started even in the traditional world, because at that time science was important. So we got rid of the Zodiac. We got rid of it. And basically, Jews today believe we never were part of it. It was never part of our world. Only changing a little bit because of archaeology. Because I think many of us have seen it, the synagogue in Beit Alpha, which is in Israel, in the northeast part of Israel. And it had on it this incredible mosaic with 3 depictions, 2 biblical depictions, and in the middle, a giant zodiac depiction. And this is a 6th century synagogue. And they found others, but this one is almost perfectly preserved. And so if you go to Israel and you go see the synagogue, which we probably all have, if we've been on multiple tours, there's a good chance we've seen it, then we see a mosaic with this incredible, obvious zodiac right in the middle. And it's from the Byzantine Empire. It has the sun god Helios. It's got the 4 seasons in one section. It's got the 4 seasons in Hebrew: Nisan, Tammuz, Tishrei, Tevet, spring, summer, autumn, and winter. And so this was found in 1920s. I'm sorry, somebody had a question?
Yeah, I was just going to add, could you review for us briefly what was the Jewish prince, you say prior to 150, 200 years ago, what was the Jewish belief in the zodiac? I know in China, they believe in this kind of different signs of the zodiac have different fortunes, good luck, bad luck, and so forth. But is it a creation kind of thing? I mean, because obviously we believe in the zodiac as being constellations, right?
Right.
I mean, you could see that.
Well, we're going to talk about that right now. So
Okay.
That's what we're going into, because the belief now is that it was never part of our belief, but it was. And at different time periods, it's been more or less important to us. We're going to look at the biblical, Talmudic, post-Talmudic belief systems, understanding that by the 19th century, when science became so important, we swept it under the rug. And so today we purposefully wanted to be educated, which worked because most Jews are educated and we go to colleges at a rate that's very hard to replicate in other groups. But we do have a healthy connection to the zodiac. So let's go over some of the history of it and really think with, and again, there are things we still have in our vernacular that are zodiac based, even if we don't read it. One of them is Shlemazel. Have you ever heard of the word Shlemazel?
Yep.
Shlemazel, what is the root of Shlemazel? And I don't speak Yiddish, but I can see it right away. Mazel, which means luck. Shlemazel basically means somebody who has bad luck. So a shlemiel is somebody who's clumsy. As I was reading, a best way to see it, a shlemiel is somebody who's a little clumsy. A shlemazel is someone who gets bad luck. A shlemiel is the guy who trips. He's carrying a tray of coffee and he trips and drops the coffee. That's the shlemiel. The shlemazel is the guy who's sitting there and the coffee falls in his lap. It's bad luck. It has nothing to do with him. So to be a shlemazel, which we all know, of course, from, Laverne and Shirley, I had no idea that was Yiddish for the first 30 years of my life, but we still use it. So let's look in the Bible. there are a few references to it, not many, but a few. And mostly it's understood as dealing with the soothsayers or the diviners. And we see that prophets mention them. We see that Daniel mentions in the book of Daniel, the Babylonian astrologers and the Aramaic astrologers. We see the practice of stargazers. In the book of Jubilees, which is in the Apocrypha, it talks about Abraham was so God-fearing that he could overcome astrologers who would predict bad things for him. The book of Enoch, which is another one of the Apocrypha, talks about how sins are spread through astrology. Josephus, who is post-Talmudic, the greatest historian, first century CE, says that in the first century CE, astrology was very prominent and that many people believe that it was the bad predictions of astrology that led to the destruction of the first temple. In the Bible, there are also very specific speeches by prophets mostly, but others. For instance, the prophet Isaiah says, "Let them stand up and help you now, the scanners of heaven, the stargazers who announce month by month whatever will come upon you." Okay, so the idea is that it's not just later, but even the Bible, we have some type of rudimentary understanding of this. And we see it in several places from Daniel to Isaiah. It's even in the Torah when it talks about soothsayers and not calling upon witches or calling upon the dead. So it's their prohibitions. Solomon is even referred to as somebody who had a very deep understanding of astrology. That comes, of course, later. So we really see that it is part of the Bible, but not so frequently referenced that it's something we would all understand. I mean, obviously, there's the do not practice divination or soothsaying, Leviticus. Everybody knows about that one. There is a passage in Deuteronomy that speaks about, here it is. When you come upon land which the Lord give you, you shall not learn to do after the abominations of those nations. There shall not be among you anyone that makes his son or daughter pass through fire, or that uses divination, soothsaying, or enchanting, or becomes a sorcerer or charmer, or anyone who consults with a ghost, a familial spirit, or a necromancer. So that is actually in Deuteronomy. So those are the two or three passages in the Bible that reference it, but mostly in the Bible, when we see it, it is referencing that we are not supposed to do it. Jews are not supposed to do it. What does the Bible not say that is essential for understanding of the Zodiac? The Bible says don't do it, but the Bible does not say it doesn't work. So the Bible infers that these things are real and can work. It just says we're not supposed to do it. And that's an important difference for when we come to the Talmud and later on, because the Bible basically says it is possible. And as we get to the later books of the Bible, you see there is a little bit of practicing of Jews, especially in the Apocrypha, especially in what people are doing in real life, as we read from Josephus. That's one of the reasons Josephus was important. He's a historian from the first century CE. So he's actually living at the time of the destruction of the first temple. He's living when only 2 generations from biblical book, he's living before the books of the Bible are chosen. So we know astrology is part of that world. We know there's a belief it worked. We know that there are prohibitions in the Bible, but there's also a belief that these things work, and that in some cases, subtly, the Bible says it's okay to use them. For instance, Jethro says to Moses, consulting astrology is something you should do. Jethro is Moses's father-in-law. And so we see that Moses faces off against the astrologers and the sorcerers of Egypt. And does God say those things don't work? Does it say the sorcerers of Egypt can't do magic? No, it says basically what? That Moses and God just do it better. Remember, the sorcerers change their staffs into snakes. They do that. What does Moses do? He does the same thing. It says his snake eats the others. So it's not that they can't do stuff. It's that they don't do it as well. And we're supposed to follow God. So anything that is connected to God astrologically is okay. Anything that separates us from God is not okay. And any questions before we go on? So that's the biblical stuff. Obviously, we have less information because we don't have very much information outside of the Bibles. It's too old. Once we get to post-biblical literature, we have a lot more. And we get to the Talmud. And then we also have historians who talk about what people were really doing. Again, that's why Josephus is so good, because he tells us what is really going on during his time period. He's not just writing a holy book. Any thoughts? All right, we'll go over some specifics in a little bit, but just a general knowledge of Larry.
The Christ birth story, obviously the three people from the East come to visit, and Mary and Joseph, and tell them about, the miracle, the son is, is going to be born and stuff like that. So that basically, there's something about the stars in that
definitely.
So apparently, Judaism was still, even at the time of Christ, if we believe in that story, there's a lot of going on with, the heavens and Judaism and being able to predict things. Did the prophecies of Isaiah or anybody talk about anything in the stars for the coming of the Messiah?
No, I mean, you have to understand what we consider the idea of the Messiah is really not biblical. I mean, there's a few rough, basic references to this messianic character, but Isaiah is way too early before we have this idea of the Messiah. I mean, you can go back. If we were in the 3rd century or 2nd century BCE, we would probably read Isaiah and have no inclination of this Messiah character. The Messiah character really becomes more part of our world in the 1st century CE and the end of the 1st century BCE. So that's when Christianity's begun. That's why the Messiah and Jesus is such an essential part of Christianity, because it's formed as a religion during a period where this messianic idea is created. So there is not that much about a Messiah coming in the Bible, in our Bible. It's just not very much part of it. You can infer a few things, but in terms of direct references, very little.
Because I remember reading the book, The Passover Plot, years ago, where, the thesis was Jesus had, known so much of the prophecy, he was well educated at the time, and he knew the prophecies, and the whole thing was a plan. And so I was just, and I think they reference heavily the book of, Isaiah, as far as Isaiah being the predictor of the Messiah, one of the predictors. And I'm just wondering if there was anything that Isaiah predicted about something in the stars as well.
Well, I mean, the stars much more likely than the Messiah. I mean, they were definitely using the stars and stargazing for a variety of things. So that for almost certainly. But remember, when it comes to prophecy in Judaism, a lot of the prophets are not what you would call prophetic. A prophet's job is to tell people you're misbehaving. That's their job. It's not to predict the future. You can say if you misbehave, bad things are going to happen. And if you don't misbehave, if you behave, good things are going to happen. And there is some predictions based upon that, but it's not as much as what you would think. A prophet doesn't necessarily somebody who predicts the future. A prophet's predicting the future depending on your behavior, which is a very different answer, because that means you're not predicting a certain future, you're predicting a dependent future. So you're not predicting the future at all. If I say the Dallas Cowboys are going to win the Super Bowl, which of course would be, basically saying the Messiah is coming next year, that's predicting it. If I see the Cowboys have made the Super Bowl and I say, well, if the Cowboys work out and if they're all healthy and if the other team has 7 injuries to their major players, then the Cowboys are going to win the Super Bowl. That is a totally different prediction. The quarterback goes down for the other team and I predict. So when you have knowledge of what people do, or you predict based on what people do, I will make a good grade if I study. That is a prediction. It's not a guarantee, but it is a better prediction than just saying, I'm going to make a good grade. I don't know if that helps or makes it worse. Genevieve. And you're perfect.
Oh, sorry. So this is just a theory, obviously, but I think astrology is more based off of what, like seasonal, like they would see the certain, constellations, right? And they would know that that pattern happened in previous years. Like you said, they would almost make a prediction based off the past. So they would say, we know this type of season, when we see this constellation in the sky, these things happen. And so they take from the past to like predict the future. The same you're talking about, like similar with the prophets. To some degree, they probably predict based off of patterns that happened in the past.
And that is certainly part of it, and that would be science. But when we come to Larry, we talk about astrology, because that's exactly how they did it. We're going to see there's connections to what date you're born, what day of the week you're born. There are connections to these astrological signs as well. So the prophets did both what I said and what Larry said. It's just the Messiah is not as much of a center of the Jewish world until really a little later on. But he's in there. I mean, you can see references to him in Isaiah especially, but Christianity looks at Isaiah very differently than Judaism does.
I think it's also like the football stats you were saying too, is they took like stats from the past.
And
were able
and that's
to
very likely. Yeah. Oh, definitely. Now, what we're going to see though is, where do we see astrology? Now, what is most interesting is that when it comes to the Talmud, most rabbis support the idea of astrology. Most do. Post-Talmudic sages, the same. So most believe astrology works and that it is a part of the world, and that this mystic belief system works, as Larry was saying exactly, that you can do these things. However, what is the problem with astrology? It is not the science itself. It's that people aren't able to understand how to really do it. So maybe astrology works, except for people are not God-fearing enough to know how to work it. And that's one of the issues, is that you have to be God-fearing to work it. There's also a belief by some, and we'll go over that astrology is not for Jews, that it works for others, but Jews are above it. But there are predictions from some believe from Solomon, from Jethro, that are referenced in the Talmud. So they believe in the idea that these celestial bodies, and I think they knew 7 of them. They knew 7 celestial bodies. They knew the moon, the sun, the earth, and I think they could see 4 planets. Obviously, Mars, Venus, and and then the other ones were, I forgot which of the other two they could see. So they could see 7 celestial bodies
Saturn.
if they counted the Earth. And so 7 celestial bodies, or maybe not counting the Earth. Did it count the Earth? I don't remember. They could see, I don't think it counted the Earth. I think they could see 5 planets and the sun and the moon. So what does 7 correlate to in Judaism? In all humanity these days? 7 days of creation, 7 days of the week. Michael.
Yeah, that's it just reminded me of numerology and how the Kabbalists use it. And I just wonder if there's really any connection.
Oh, most definitely. Once you get to the time of Kabbalah, then numerology is definitely connected. That they are the ones who connect it. It's not this early yet, but that is going to happen. So at this point in the Talmud and before that, the stars affect who we are because they also had the 12 constellations, which would represent eventually 12 months on the lunar calendar, which is what we see at the mosaic. We've seen at mosaics in Israel are the 12 constellations and how they fit, and we'll talk about in a second. So we have 7, we have 12, we have mysticals, we have 4 seasons. So a lot of these things, we have your date of birth, depending on the constellation was important, depending on the day of the week. If you're born on Sunday, and we'll talk about in a second, if you're born on Sunday, what we call Sunday, which is the first day of the week, you have certain attributes. If you're born on second, everything like that. There's a belief that we are connected to a celestial body ourselves. That people who are born under the same star have a kinship very similar to those who are born in the same constellation have a similar attributes. My wife wanted very much my kids to be of a certain constellation. And when the first one was born, the second one had to be of a certain constellation or two, so we made sure we got that exactly right. And I am, what am I? I am, what's the twins again? Gemini. I'm a Gemini. So all of us probably know our constellations, even if we do not pay special attention to it, but we still know it. And we probably know people who ask us about our constellations and tell us who we are in many respects, our attributes according to them. My wife is very much a part of that world. I am not. It doesn't mean she's wrong and I'm right, or that I'm wrong and she's right. It's a different way because, quite frankly, Jews have looked at constellations since probably the very beginning. And Jews have looked at days a week, and a lot of these things were probably assumed they were doing it. As we see, not only that, in books outside of Judaism, they talk about Jews at times who did refrain from it. There's something called Sibylline oracles, which is a Greek thing. They talked about how Jews were not following this type of astrology. And they praise them for doing it. But they were doing other types of astrology. But again, there's these kind of understanding type thing that Jews were part of it, but in some ways they were doing it differently. But they're very strict about one thing. If you're doing astrology in an absence of a God-centered belief system, you're doing it wrong. Everybody agrees that. Astrology has to be connected to the God. It can't be connected to randomness. It's connected to a creation story in which the story itself is very much an organized, connected story. So everything has to be organized in the world. That means there can be meaning found only if you're doing it through God. If you're not, then you're doing it wrong. Eclipses of the moon were thought to be evil later on for Jews. Why? Because what kind of calendar did we use religiously? A lunar calendar. Once the solar calendar came into effect, the solar eclipse was thought to be bad luck for people who ascribed to the solar calendar, Gentiles as they were called, which is bad for us and good for them because there's a lot more lunar eclipses than solar eclipses. So we got a lot more bad luck than them on this one thing. But there's beliefs, even if you were born connected to a celestial, not counting the stars, body. So if you're born near the sign of Venus, you are going to be rich, but also adulterous. If you were born under Saturn, you would have plans annulled. If you were born under Jupiter, you would be that's the one you don't want to be. That's like the person who is a tzaddik has to be born under the time of Jupiter. So I guess they're Mars, Venus, Jupiter. There's two other ones they probably saw. I don't know if it was Mercury or if it was, what's the other ones? Maybe Saturn. I don't know. I'll have to check which one. I forgot which one's the 5. I apologize. So now, again, there are also rabbis. Most rabbis in the Talmud supported the idea of astrology. Some believed, again, that they extended to ordinary mortals and not to the people of Israel because we have God on our side. We're following the commandments. We can overcome it. So in other words, a virtuous Jewish person could transform and, as I read, abrogate the decrees of these bodies. That was kind of our power. But what's really interesting is a lot of the most famous rabbis were very much into astrology. There's one rabbi, post-Talmudic, who was completely against it. You probably have guessed. Maimonides, scientist, completely against astrology. He is one of the few that is completely against it, thinking it is nothing, he's a scientist. But others were generally of the others. Rabbi Akiva and his daughter were thought to have been very big practitioners. That is incredible. There's also strange good luck charms that we all know about, a lot of them coming back from our time in Eastern Europe. But one of the ones I really enjoyed was you kept an unslept bed in the house for good luck. So you didn't make one of the beds in your house, basically. And that was good luck. And that apparently was a frequently continued practice during the Talmudic times because it gave you mazel, it gave you luck. Now, post-Talmudic, and you think as a Talmud finished in the 500, so post-Talmudic, you come to the time of the Gaonim. These are the great Babylonian academies. The greatest of all these leaders was Zodiac Gaon. Think about the prayer book, Jewish law. He's the one who kind of put the stamp on what was going on. One marriage, wearing a kippah. All these things come at this time. And Zodiac Gaon himself, the great Zodiac Gaon, was a supporter of astrology. He even wrote a very famous book called Sefer Yetzirah, which is kind of the book of the creation of astrology, that he wrote in Arabic because obviously he was living in what is now Iran and the time controlled by the Caliphate. So he himself, Solomon ibn Gabriel, also another very famous sage of the time, were very much, and again, Zodiac Gaon actually wrote a commentary on this book, Sefer Yetzirah, which had been written, sorry, I said he wrote it, but he didn't, it was written before him by another guy named Anolo. So even Ezra, who was a later post-Gaonim, in the 12th century, was a big proponent of astrology. He believed that beings in the sublunar world were influenced by the stars and the zodiac. So he was much more into the zodiac as opposed to the celestial. And he based it all on God and the Tetragrammaton, which is, of course, the name of God, Yud-He, Vav-He. So I had a question in the chat. Any other questions? See, there's somebody in the chat. Yeah, I can Sefer Yetzirah. I'll put that in here. I don't think Yetzi. Yeah, I don't know if it's through Yetzirah. I don't know if it's. I don't know if all these things are translated. I have not read them because obviously I'm fluent in Arabic and ancient Aramaic and all other languages. I speak. When people ask me which language do you speak, I basically say all of them. So that's just what I say. So Judah Halevi, the great poet, most famous person, Jewish person, all of the golden age of Spain, in the book The Khazari, which it was basically letters he was writing back and forth to Jewish communities and other places, said that celestial bodies had an influence over terrestrial affairs, that the terrestrial was considered anything sublunar, and that the constellations had an effect, and that the sayings of previous rabbis were based upon them. So we see not only were a few rabbis, a lot of rabbis, in some cases the majority, but also most of the most famous rabbis, obviously Maimonides, Philo, I think, was also very much against it. He wasn't a rabbi, but a great sage. And so very much supportive of some were more constellations, some were more the seven celestial, what do you call it? Celestial bodies. Plus, when you add that to the mosaics we found, especially the one in Israel I mentioned earlier, then we see that astrology has become a big part of our world. I'm going to put up where did I put that? Let's see here, a picture. There you go. Let me go here. Here's an example of connecting the 12 constellations used for the astrology with the 12 what? The 12 tribes. So this is a way that you can see that they were connected. Remember, the Greek world was very much a part of the Jewish world was very connected to the Greek world for a long time. And once the Greek world had been defeated, the Romans kept a lot of that stuff around. And so we can see that you can see which tribe you're connected to according to your birth time. I would be part of Zebulun. Aries, can you guys see what I'm doing here? Let's see, no, drop, there you go. Everybody see this? Aries is connected to who? Judah. Why would Aries be connected to Judah? And I'm not that big of an astrologer, but who is Aries? Aries is the god of war, power. And who is Judah? Judah is the leader of the 12 brothers. And who is going to be the greatest of the people coming from Judah? King David comes from the line of Judah. The kings come from the line of Judah.
See, I would have assumed it was Leo because of the lion they associate, but I was totally wrong.
Oh, Leo would be another one. Leo is connected to Shimon. And I got to see why, because Leo, the lion is a representation of Judaism, is considered one of the key, representations. He's with Simeon. I'll have to look up exactly why that. But let's see here. Let me get these notes. Okay. Looking at my notes. Okay.
When was that chart drawn up, Rabbi? Who originated that idea of connecting?
That chart was from, let's see here. That is from, that chart is not the old one. Obviously, it's with computer graphics. It's based upon, I'm trying to see what time period. I'm pretty sure it's based upon the Greek. So probably, 2nd, 3rd century CE. But again, not everybody followed the same exact celestial practices.
I just looked at my stamp album for a second, and I had recalled, when I was more involved in stamp collecting, I collected Israel stamps, and this is symbols of the Zodiac from 1961. And I'm sure they've had other issues since then, which I just didn't have a chance to thumb through. But you could see that even the state of Israel acknowledges that the Zodiac must have been important, and they published the whole series. They don't tie them to the tribes here, but they just tie them to the formations of the stars. Yeah,
and again, that is done quite a bit, and it's really understood. There are even, the Dead Sea Scrolls are famous because of the biblical stuff they find, but in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they did find horoscopes for Jewish people. Obviously that's not as big a deal as finding the actual Bible from that time period, but it just shows. So again, what we're seeing is that throughout history until what we call the Haskalah, and that is, of course, the educated period of science, and that's what they call it in Judaism, 18th and really 19th century, that it starts to fade from our viewpoint. And as I mentioned, Jeffrey Dennis, who is a rabbi actually outside, I know him, he's a rabbi, and I just forgot the name, it's outside of Dallas, a wonderful guy. He writes about that quite a bit. That's kind of his field of expertise. So you'll see him describe some of these things. So now also, as would it be expected in the Zohar, which is the great center book for the mysticism, for the Kabbalah, it basically states all the stars and constellations in the heavens were appointed to be rulers and commandments over the world. There's not a single blade of grass in the entire world over which a star or planet does not preside. And over that star, one angel is appointed who serves in the presence of the Holy One, blessed be he, each according to his merit. So in other words, the stars have an effect. However, who is watching every blade of grass or every star? There's an angel, in Judaism, an angel is a messenger of God who is watching it on behalf of God. So we only do it when it comes to God. You got to keep God in there, or else it doesn't work. And again, if you go over the rabbis who do this, or if you find it in the Midrash, there is just so much. It's really almost understood. But then you do have rabbis who believe you shouldn't do it. We are not permitted to appeal to the Chaldeans as it's worded in the Deuteronomy. And some take that the Chaldeans later consider the Babylonians. Some take that as being the practice of astrology. In other words, study astrology, but it's got to be a Jewish astrology connected to God. And Jews who are righteous have the ability to overcome anything that might be predicted of them if they are righteous, especially bad things. So it's basically saying what we said before. The prophets say, if you behave and follow the commandments, good things are probably going to happen. It's a prediction based upon our behavior.
It just tells you when to bring an umbrella if it's raining.
That would be very helpful. That's the most practical of any of them.
That was obviously a metaphor, but
Yes. And again, that is a general belief system that free will really has an important part to play if you behave in a certain way. Now, Maimonides was again the exception. He believed that you had to have rational proof. And he basically insults people who follow astrology. Now, remember, during his time period, he was very important, but he was also considered a heretic by a lot of people because of a book of mysticism he wrote, not mysticism, book of theology he wrote. So, but, there were Jews who were astronomers and astrologers for kings and leaders in various places. There was, of course, in Eastern Europe, as education became as non-Jewish education became less and less a part of our world, more and more the idea of ghosts and all of these Baba Mises and all of these things became part of our world, putting sand in our pockets. And, a lot of us know different ones. Don't say the name of the czar. You say poo-poo, you spit every time you say something. Those are based on these ideas as well. But of course, they went kind of overboard in that world because not everybody believes in the putting sand in your pocket type of thing. That was a very particular Eastern Europe where Jews were not allowed to be in the science world. So, but as we say, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yochanan, Mar Samuel, Rav Nachman, Bar Yitzchak, all supported it, believing that it did work, but believing also that for Israel, it doesn't necessarily mean as much as for those who are not following the commandments. And again, every time we say Mazel Tov, it is a way of acknowledging the astrological part of Judaism. Whenever we say Shlamazel, it's the same thing. It's all from the word luck, which is also constellations. Any questions or thoughts? It's a really interesting subject. We just gleaned a little bit of it because we went through thousands of years. But what we know for sure is for a very long time, astrology has been part of Judaism going all the way back to the Torah itself. Very much so in the prophets, but even more so in the post-biblical era during the time of the Romans, the Greeks, all the way to Jews who were living in Babylon, all the way to Jews who were living in Egypt, Jews who were living in Europe in the 12th, 13th century, and all the way into Eastern Europe, where it was, the Baba Mises, the superstitions really became not overwhelming, but just the number of them became, expanded so greatly. And it all started to come to an end during the Haskalah, during this movement of education, until the point that most Jews today would say Judaism does not believe in astrology. I would guess that. And so I'd say most Jewish people who were astrologers or into that practice do it in a non-Jewish way, where if they realized they could do it in a Jewish way, I think they would.
Rabbi, question here.
I think you're muted. No?
Am I muted or can you hear me? You can hear me. In many of the Asian societies, astrology is very, very important, the signs of the Zodiac and things like this. And, there are connections between, I think, as you mentioned, between, this sign is a favorable sign and this person should marry this kind of person, because of a favorable sign. Do Jewish matchmakers, does anybody know, use any of these signs for, saying this would be a favorable match because this sign is, this person and that person are, compatible because of the favorable signs?
I would guess yes. I don't have a record of that, but that would be interesting to look up Jewish matchmakers, what they would do, because I know my wife, for instance, is very, very much in belief that certain people, get along better because of their signs, siblings, husband, wife, friends. So I would imagine yes. I would guess yes. I don't know for sure though. That's interesting. And other people again think it's ridiculous, but again, even to this day, if you go into say certain Orthodox communities, you would think that they would not believe it, but a lot of them believe that astrology has some sort of power, but there's that fine line believing in astrology and believing in a power that is not part of God. So that's pretty much a universal aspect to it, that astrology cannot exist in our world outside of God. That if astrology does work, that doesn't mean the people who are practicing it are knowledgeable enough or virtuous enough to use it. And in most cases, probably not. So that would be probably the Jewish perspective.
What did your wife, what did you tell her you were going to teach this class, and what was her reaction?
I forgot to do that. I probably should have.
Oh, I would have just liked to hear like how she responded.
I think she'd be very supportive. I mean, she again believes in certain, she doesn't use the Jewish signs. She's using the ones that, what do we call I guess the Greek ones.
Western astrology.
Yeah.
I would think that, and it's just, of course, my thought or theory on it, because I have always come at it from more of a pattern math, statistics kind of way. And I think it's more like, obviously God would be the center, but then it's a tool, just like he gives us a Torah or he gives us other tools. I think it's a way to just chart the patterns and then knowing how to prepare, kind of like when they, what was it? Is it Joseph? Not Joseph, that said something about the 7-year famine.
Yeah, Joseph.
And so so that like in 7 years you can stockpile because something like that you know how to prepare. That's all.
Right. And that could be,
that the bad times will pass and they're not forever.
Yeah, and again, Joseph would be considered a little different though, because his came directly from God. Again, it comes to the idea that it has to be part of God. But again, your viewpoint of astrology would be the Jewish viewpoint, that it's a very delicate belief system, and to use it to determine how you're going to invest your money or all these major things is probably a problematic at best, not because it may not exist, but because people do not know how to read the signs, and you have to be a certain kind of person who's virtuous and can really understand how things are going. And most of the time, people who have that ability are not the ones who are going to be concerned about investing money. They're going to be the ones concerned more about the benefit of humankind. So that would be one of the...
Like the weatherman isn't always right. He can chart like, oh, this is what's happened in the past. When these certain things happened, it created a storm. But then, they're not 100% accurate all the time.
Right. And then some people just think it's all fake and it doesn't make a difference at all. I mean, again, but, science sometimes does step in, as years later, after we came to understand that the moon does affect the earth. And the effects are very, very much a part of our world. So if everything is connected to everything, who knows? So I'm not saying it one way or the other. I'm just telling you what the belief system is from history. And generally speaking, we were much more into astrology for the first 2,000 years or 3,000 years, as opposed to the last 200 years.
We were probably more observant too, because now we're distracted by like technology and other things, like you said. So we were probably, when we didn't have TVs and everything to distract us, we were more observant of what was happening around us, I guess.
That's probably true. And I think even beforehand, I think there was, a conscious decision to step away from that world in many places. Europe was changing, the Industrial Revolution. Jews were being let out of the ghettos. Jews were being let out of the shtetls. Jews were getting rights. Jews were going to universities, which had never been allowed before. There was this rush to be like other people and take advantage of all these opportunities. And to do so in that world and remain an astrologer would have been problematic. Now, not so much, but back then, we're trying to get into this world of science, but we also understand the world of science had some terrible, terrible side effects. The Holocaust being one of them, global, issues with, global climate change. But at the time, the Haskalah really first hit Europe, and then it eventually, let's call it something else, hits even Eastern Europe.
Going back to what Genevieve was saying about, looking back and using, forecasting kind of things as data. I remember as a student, I think it was in junior high, they took us to the Hayden Planetarium, which is part of the Museum of Natural History in New York City. And it happened to be close to Christmas. And it was, they had recreated at the Hayden Planetarium, supposedly what the skies looked like, to the best of their accuracy, on the planetarium ceiling of the time, the moment that Christ was born. And they were saying that that's a fortuitous moment. And that I think they also created the time, that was when religion and, was a little bit more prevalent in school systems. And they created the time when he died. They were able to show what the heavens were. And that was a very, auspicious moment as far as, being a non-desirable kind of moment. So there was this kind of a link, I think, that people want to believe that there's something in the heavens that are sending a signal. I never got the religious aspects of it, but it was just interesting that you can go back in time and look at what the stars looked like at the time of Christ, right, on a planetarium ceiling, and try and draw conclusions from that.
Right. And even with the Sphirot, which are the mystical belief of the connection between the bridge between human beings and God, there's a belief that they're connected to the astrology as well. All right. Very interesting stuff. Sorry, we only had an hour for that. That was really great. I just want to make sure people realize next week we won't have any class because I will be out of town at Disney World enjoying Star Wars, my pilgrimage. And then we will have class the following week, which will be May 4th, which is going to be at the home of Larry and Jane. So that's May 4th. We'll be at their home. The topic scheduled is Jewish history through film, which we can do, but we can also do Jewish cartoons and comics or Jewish comedians if you prefer that. Since you're hosting it, what preference do you have?
Going, huh?
Oh, it doesn't matter, whatever you're comfortable with. The only caveat we're having is that we do want to keep an eye on the COVID.
Right, obviously, yeah.
There to kind of update things because, now with this this Florida judge saying you don't have to wear masks and, there's still 2,500 people a week dying from COVID.
Yeah, we're going to definitely, that's going to be completely up to you. Even if you cancel the day before,
okay,
that's
we'll
fine.
just try and be sensible about it, okay?
Yeah, I
you can pick the topic, Rabbi, whatever you're comfortable with,
Okay.
mostly, because you'll be away. And you'll
So
be
why don't we do Jews and you want to do Jewish comedians? Just for fun?
Sure.
All right, we'll do Jewish comedians. And then, so that'll be, so I'm going to send out some note to everybody I have on the list, but please spread it around. Then in 2 weeks, if we do not go to your house, then we'll still do it online. So either way, we're going to do Jewish comedians.
All right, thank you. Great.
Yes, Flossie.
When it's at Larry and Jane's house, will it be Zoomed? We're going to be.
Yes, it'll be Zoomed. Yeah.
Will. Okay, great.
And Larry and Jane, you do know the expectations are that every next person who hosted has to offer more food than the previous person. So you have to offer more food than Eva and Paul last week.
Yeah.
So
maybe more, but it won't be as good.
More and even better. Yeah. So it's got to be all homemade, and it's got to be all from whatever your background is. And it's got to be, there's got to be a lot of containers for the rabbi to take a lot of food home. So those are the only things. And plus, what was it? Sriracha, or what was they call it that she made?
Shashuka.
Shashuka. My wife just
Shashuka.
absolutely loved that.
Yeah.
I could not eat it.
That was absolutely sensational. That was
Yeah, so-
Rabbi, if it's like that and Jane and Larry are going to equal it plus go over, then we will be staying overnight to eat.
Yeah.
We can't do it in one sitting.
No,
That's-
and then when I host it in my house, I'm just gonna have it catered to compete. So Larry, people want to bring dishes, obviously, that's wonderful. It'll be post Passover, and we'll get that information out as we go along.
okay.
Very good.
Okay.
Well, you guys, as always, have been fabulous. Thank you for everybody who was able to attend yesterday. He was a tremendous individual, and we're talking about Bob, obviously, and all our condolences to Sue as well. I know she went back. What's the name of the city where they're living now?
Greenwood.
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 Yes, Greenwood, South Carolina.
Greenwood.
And
So,
Rabbi,
It's
I know
about
she
an
don't-
hour from Greenville.
it's an hour from Greenville.
Rabbi, I know Sue very much appreciated you were there.
It
Thank
was
you.
my pleasure. And for those of you who were there and who weren't, Stuart and Jeff, I think they were the first two people to speak, and both spoke so beautifully. They were poignant, they were funny, it was meaningful. They just did a great job of talking about their friends. So all our best, everybody, and stay safe.
Friday is Yisker service, right? At 10:30.
Friday at 10:30 is Yisker service.
That's Zoom and in person.
That is only going to be in person. I'm sorry. Yeah, getting the Zoom for that, because especially because Saturday, I'll probably do some of the prayers on Saturday as well, because Saturday is we're only doing it on Friday because a couple people who wanted to do it couldn't come on Saturday, but Saturday is the 8th day, which for more traditional Jews is Yisker, but we do it on the 7th. So we'll do probably some of that on that day as well. David, did you have a question? Oh, your hand's up. I will see you and Amy in a little bit. All right, everyone, thank you again and stay safe. And
Everybody.
thanks. I'm going to be making my pilgrimage to Star Wars Land next week. I don't know if I'll get on all the rides, but I'll get to go and buy to the stores and stuff.
You better go.
Don't forget, you have to return. You can't live at Star Wars.
I know. Well, my family's going with me to Disney World.
You better get there
Wonderful.
before the governor closes Disney.
That's
World.
right. I'm worried about.
He's going to close it.
We get there Tuesday, and then Wednesday, of course, I'm going to Disney World while my family stays at the hotel. And then Thursday, my wife and my mother-in-law and my daughter are going to Disney World with my daughter to do the princess thing, and I'm going to take my son. And then Friday and Saturday we'll do. And then I have a comedy thing in Ocala on Saturday night, so it's going to be a full week for all of us. Well, because I think we may go to Peppa Pig Land and Legoland and the animal thing. I don't know. We haven't figured out all the stuff we're going to do.
Go early to the animal kingdom. You got to go early in the morning while the.
Oh, yeah, I guess because it's hot. You're right. We
Very
may or
early.
may not, depending on that. So we don't know what we know. We're doing the first 2 days, and that's it.
Well, have a lot of fun.
Have
Thanks,
fun,
guys.
enjoy the
Stay
trip.
safe. And anything you need, let me know. And be safe, everybody. Have an
Yeah.
easy end of Passover.
Watch your driving down there. They're crazy in South Florida.
And Rabbi Bucky's is waiting for you.
We're stopping. My wife was like, "Are we going to stop at Bucky's on the way there or the way back?" And I'm like, "Really? You're asking me that question?" We're obviously stopping both times. I mean,
Both ways,
both
both
ways.
ways.
In fact, there's two an hour away. Last time I came up when I was at the conference, I stopped at both Bucky's.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, terrific.